of either video game or tabletop role-playing games. So things like leveling up and acquiring gear and going to stores to shop and things like that are explicitly made part of the narrative, so that the reader feels like they are playing a game or watching someone play a game. That is my understanding.
That sounds like it to me. What does it mean to you?
LitRPG to me is where the realm of literature intersects with the realm of gaming. So how we create fictional worlds that have gaming elements, kind of any type. That's very broad. What about you?
Oh, yeah, pretty much.
Same.
Well, no, it's the, when we played, or I kind of got into it, was, you play D&D and you write down your story notes to make it a coherent narrative. And mostly remove most of the money by those ones. You can leave them in there, but you don't have to make it in there. Not all of them. I mean, you've got rid of all of them.
Coco Chanel famously said, before you go out, take off one Monty
Replace it with Jurassic Park.
I have that tattooed on my shoulder.
That's a very good Coco Chanel joke. Say that.
I love that. So that's where I got me. The leveling up. Really have been doing it. Some of it's the kick in the door / bang, power fantasy. But I've been getting into a lot of the let's build a town. Like you're on an island and you're building things. Like this is like a really cozy story. No monsters.
So, like, the different types of
RPG. It's really interesting. Are you Drew?
This is
Drew, we have a chair for you.
Yeah. I harassed you before. Were you when I was pretty young, man?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Hi, Drew. I'm Courtney. CB.
I'm free. Yes.
Hi, Drew.
Okay. So Drew, what is an RPG
To you.
Okay, so I have a semi-cursory understanding of it. I don't write in it, but I write adjacent to it. So, to my knowledge, LitRPG is a fantasy story, often with a strong emphasis on progression, growing stronger, etc. Specifically in which classic RPG mechanics such as stats, specifically like growing levels, XP, etc. So without those crunchy elements, those physical numbers in the books, again, if I'm wrong on this, apologies.
I've just seen some of the crunchy numbers. Interesting.
So my understanding is, so with those crunchy numbers, that's LitRPG. Without it, and this is the one I'm sort of in, if you write in like a game world setting, I have a book series set in the D&D world, that's called game lit.
Yes.
We should have maybe said that. So, like, this one
Okay,
is
so-
LitRPG specific, but I think I was thinking of it in...
No, it's fine. Okay, so what is game link versus RPG?
That's again, to mention, it's that specific difference is the addition or the absence of those specific numbers.
Crunchy
Those
versus
numbers.
gritty.
Yes.
That's the terminology.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've never thought of that.
So if there's not breaks where you see like their actual levels and stats and whatnot, it's inlet. If they do have those sections, then you're reading LitRPG.
Wikipedia agrees with me.
Okay, yeah, again, as it has, and
Unless you wrote the article, in which case I think that's inside baseball.
I can't even get an entry on Wikipedia. I'm certainly not contributing their own stuff.
But then there's also progression fantasy, which is slightly different. All of those.
Right, because I think that's sort of the similar styles, but it's not mapped onto RPGs or a game system or a game world. It's just someone growing specifically stronger. It's a lot of like, kill this, get this buff, or etc.
And then in LitRPG or GameLit, there is like Dungeon Core and all those other great things. Man, I do feel smart right now, so
As you should.
don't sound smart later, just remember this one moment.
Okay.
I have a question if you want an opportunity to continue sounding smart.
Don't hold me to it.
It is an exciting moment for us all, I think. I find this genre fascinating for a number of reasons. The biggest for me is figuring out what the reader experience is, which is obviously something that's highly personal and subjective and individual. But I have heard that there is a pretty rabid market for this genre, and I admit that I have a hard time I have a hard time projecting myself into the mind of the ideal reader. So what do you think the perfect reader who loves LitRPG, what do they love about it?
Would like to touch that.
I can take a swing.
Go for it.
Swing away.
I would say, so a lot of classic fantasy functions on a very standard idea of motion fiction. It's often a power fantasy. It's an idea of being something in fiction or being somewhere that you are not in real life. And I think the fact that LitRPG, it absolutely does have a very strong fan base. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, as we pointed out, it sort of is part of progression fantasy, which is a lot more kind of streamlined in this mechanic. It really drills down that dopamine reward that you see in that sort of thing. So if you're someone who likes that style and you don't necessarily like the bits that derive from it, you are more just about the journey of getting stronger and seeing those powers in action, hit a new ball, rise above it. It's Dragon Ball Z, if we want to get straight down to it. It's that, but it's just really streamlined, and when it's done well, it's done in a way that means other stuff into the narrative. And so I think if I was to guess what's the ideal audience, I think it's folks who enjoy that type of story and find that the progression stuff gives them the most concentrated dose of it.
I don't know that there is an ideal. I think there's something in these overarching umbrellas kind of for everybody. I mean, there's a reason why Ender's Game was so popular, Ready Player One. Like, there's a lot of pop culture in these books, so maybe if you have an appreciation for current events or, anything that's probably out there, like, there's something for everyone in these genres. I have a personal preference that I don't care for the mechanics a lot of times, so I tend to float towards Gambit, just in general for myself. So I think you can kind of find something for everyone.
So you guys are reading through, what's your favorite type? What's your favorite, micro books that possibly LitRPG game?
Strong female protag. Just because I like when the lady kicks some ass. But yeah, Gamelit, probably under the Gamelit heading. I don't care for the farming books, so the world building and all of that. There's a really funny one that's like, I was reincarnated as a farmer or something. I'm messing up the title now. It's super popular Gamelit book, and I just find it very slow. This whole world and this whole progression is based on farming in this world. It's funny. The man, he has funny for him, but it's too slow. So funny, strong female protagonist that's kicking ass.
Well, I will happily throw myself on the fire and say that I don't know really enough about it to say that I have a favorite. I mean, like I said before, the concept itself is something that I find that I have a little difficulty wrapping my head around. And I think in part because in a strange way, it reminds me a lot of what I do professionally. I stream online, not exclusively games, but I do play a number of games. And so a lot of my life is people watching me play a game and with the narrative and watching me make the choices and progress and get better at things. And so when I first became acquainted with the idea of LitRPG, it felt like that process sort of transposed to prose fiction. And I think it's a weird way to answer the question of what's I'm still trying to get my head into the umbrella.
Kind of want to see it, or?
Yeah. What would that experience be for me? What would I like? I'm still sort of in I've jumped into the pool and it's still so cold I can't think. I haven't yet begun to swim.
Do you have a favorite?
I don't have a ton of experience with the genre, but I will plug one that I have read. I guess I'll disclose as sort of a friend, but Matt Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Girl series.
That's a hilarious series.
Is one I really enjoy, and that's one where it is LitRPG, does have the mechanics in there. There are kind of some good world building reasons for it, and I think the reason that I just like it is it's just a very good story with a lot of strong emotional components in there. sort of create a constant sense of movement. Like it puts the main character in a situation where he always has to be active and fighting and getting stronger, etc. But it's done to give us a sense of how unsafe he feels and how he never has time to like stop and be okay. And, which sort of builds on like the situation, which is horrible and like all these people are going through. And it's meant to, you know, I feel like the mechanics aid the story. And I think that's always the best option is when the story is aided by the mechanics that it's using.
Also, very funny as a cat that is the main character. That's a great series.
So I know funny seems to be important to these, or at least fun seems to be very important to these kinds of stories. And I know they're kind of co-evolving with isekai literature. So, and you can see that especially with titles, right? So how much do you think we're influencing that, and how much is isekai influencing LitRPG, or are they kind of coming from the same well and just being put out the same in different forms?
Someone I was speaking to about this yesterday actually compared the genre both to isekai and also to Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Courts. I think that there definitely is a lineage that predates our current sort of micro trends of, and it's certainly not linked to any particular culture clearly, of being whisked away. And I think for the person I was speaking with, the thing that really stuck out to him about the Connecticut Yankee example is that in that book, the protagonist uses knowledge that's specifically related to being outside of the world. In the same way that a player sucked into a video game would know more about mechanics than the programmed NPCs. So I think there's this interesting, which is, to me, in line with the power fantasy, right? And it sort of runs parallel to the traditional power fantasy of, oh, I can become stronger and more skilled, but also the power fantasy of, oh, the things I already know that seem so unspecial, you know, Last Starfighter, Ender's Game, as I said before, all of a sudden those skills are incredibly highly valued. I think that's very powerful.
It's sort of like a late in life chosen story, because we all at this point know there's not a mythical prophecy hanging over each of our heads, I assume.
Well, I'm not really
yeah.
Okay.
Let's not close the door on that.
You know, that genre allows for the, no, we're special all along. We're doing what you were supposed to be doing. Or, you know, you just didn't have the prophecy because it happens at this point. And so suddenly all the stuff you've been doing is both validated and validated.
Maybe it redefines what special means.
Do you think there is something inherent to the genre that focuses on an outsider protagonist? Does that strengthen it? Is it particularly well suited to the genre?
Well, I think it's definitely well suited to the nature of the genre, because having an outsider allows for the nature of gaming exposition, which can be kind of hand-fisted to work in and other components. But when your main character, your point of view, doesn't know anything about the world and has to have it explained to them chunk by chunk, that just creates a very natural narrative stream to kind of build up your world into pieces and at the speed you want.
You're kind of combining the newbie and the metagaming and making it a bonus and not the most obnoxious person. Sorry.
Sometimes obnoxious characters do well. They just
Well, yeah, because you get to watch them beat up in the slime, and and they come back and do it again.
I'd argue that even Carl in that series is maybe a little obnoxious sometimes, and he still has great character development, and the pacing is amazing. So, yeah. And to answer your question, I don't know that we are influencing like by we or we, the royal we.
Well, the literature versus the manga and anime.
Yeah,
kind of feels.
you said it, I think, at the beginning of your question. I feel like it's co-evolution. Like, I see this overlap that's happening that I think is really cool, and I think it is kind of pulling in some elements on both sides that is interesting to watch.
Well, and would that influence the ideal reader for this genre? Is that someone who enjoys both manga and video games would be someone who would also enjoy this kind of book?
I think that's a cool thing about the genre too, and the kind of subgenres around it is like it's newish. So we are watching the ideal reader evolve in real time. So we are seeing, this genre push boundaries and do different things. So yeah, I think it could, but who knows, right? The sky's the limit right now, I think.
I think there's mentioned too that a lot of the anime that comes from the manga comes from light novels. So there is already that natural existence of their literary scene being kind of translated out into the eventual art that we see in the anime.
Well, we've had, so portal fantasies have been a thing forever. Language in the wardrobe. I'm not going to go back because I don't think very nerdy into this. Portal fantasy has been a thing forever, so what is new that makes basically make a portal fantasy into a video game more of a thing that's hitting right now? What have we done to go from portal fantasy into we walk through a door and all of a sudden you're in the world to you get hit by lightning or something in your computer?
They're not all that.
They're not all, right.
It's very important they don't all involve lightning.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a large, heavy object.
Sometimes you find your programming and you realize, oh, I can increase my strength by this.
But sometimes the game is the natural world. Sometimes you don't have a character pulled into a game.
Right.
Off to be the wizard.
Yeah, there's a bunch. So why is it different from Portal Fantasy? I mean, it doesn't have a portal necessarily. They can't always get back, or it doesn't follow. I gotta think about that more. That's like a half-baked thought. What do you think, Drew?
I mean, I guess we're just asking like why portal fantasy has grown more prevalent in more recent years.
It seems that we've kind of gone from portal fantasy being one thing to being a different. So kind of how we're seeing it now in the LitRPG. How and why do you think it?
I think often it's just a matter of storytelling efficiency and tropes being found by people who can utilize them to kind of, streamline their own stuff. And so the portal allows for real natural, quick movement. Like, you know why generally you're in a book. So if you're picking up a book like this, it's because you want to read about the progression of the leveling, etc. So I think a portal probably allows for a real natural early step in with minimal setup, and I'm sure a lot of authors notice and then build from there.
It does make me wonder if there is a larger trend towards readers desiring escapism. I mean, obviously, the vast majority of literature tends to feature some aspect of that, right? Because it is, in some degree, a different world you're stepping into. But certainly, language in the wardrobe is explicitly framed in the book as, oh, let's go to this dreary old place in England and no one wants to be there, but then, magical world. And I think even in examples of LitRPG where there isn't necessarily a portal, I think, to me, it feels a little bit like the mechanics, whether they're crunchy or creamy, look, man,
I put that in your head.
it's in me now. It's in me, it'll always be in me. If I have to suffer, everyone has to suffer with me.
I didn't make that up. That's someone smarter than me created that.
Well, then I have you and others to blame. Chain of custody. What was I saying? Crunchy or creamy? I think that there is, to me, it feels like some attempt to really enhance that immersion. And when I think of readers desiring immersion in a wholly self-sustaining world, that to me does feel very linked to escapist fiction. And this is a terrible way to end this because I'm not a sociologist and have no authority to say this, but it'd be interesting to see if there are rises and falls in our culture, Japanese culture, different markets, different cultures. Is there a link between what's happening in the world and escapist fiction? Not to put a finer point on it, but a lot of us spent the last 2 years cooped up and isolated from lots of people and places, and maybe there's more of an appeal to somewhere else.
I don't have to leave my house, but I can leave everything I've got behind.
Yeah.
I think that's a good question. That's a good thought. I think I should have something.
I will go get a degree in sociology.
Please don't. You're working better than that.
Strong disagree with me.
Sorry. I have lost my track and brain.
I have a question.
Go for it. Questions.
This is going back a bit to I believe was Drew was saying, those words didn't make a full sentence. I believe Drew was talking about how the stats and mechanics really enhance the feeling of progression and movement and instability and danger and all those things, which to me I found kind of odd, exciting, because those to me sound like things that any kind of adventure story should have. But clearly there is something unique about this. So I'm wondering if people have thoughts about what, is it an enhancement of that? Is it a just sort of increased visualization of that? Or is it actually a different feeling to have, say, Indiana Jones, who has to keep moving because there are, people who are chasing him and shooting at him, versus someone, the protagonist, who is in a more kind of codified game setting and is being pushed along by more conspicuously and purposefully mechanical forces.
Question.
Definitely a difference. I mean, any time you have pressure on a protagonist, the different types of pressure are going to elicit a slightly different type of story. And, the mechanics of not always understanding what's happening to your world. Like, Indiana Jones is generally fighting against, generally, at least until the end of the movies, when he ignores the magical. He's fighting against pretty understandable, comprehensible issues and enemies. And, the ones he ignores the ones that aren't. So functionally he always is. But in, I think, a lot of the, we're talking about people going into other worlds, we're talking about the reincarnation fantasy. A big part of that is often not knowing the world that you're stepping into, not knowing the mechanics, not knowing the challenges. And so I think there's really a big difference when, these are the threats, how can I wrap my head around them, how can I plan for them, versus, does God want to kill me? I think
Right.
God might want to kill me. What do I do with this?
So it's less the pressure and peril that's being exerted by specific actors, and more, what is it, right? PvP versus PvE, player versus environments.
Yeah, that's a good
There is, that is kind of bleak and terrifying. Perhaps that's not the intention, but that's how I feel.
Well,
About
the
God
example you were
wants to kill me.
citing, it definitely was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing too with the mechanics, they can almost become a character in and of themselves, because you're learning how those mechanics interact with what you think you know, and you're watching that not always be true. So you can utilize those to do a lot of plot things as a writer.
Okay, so kind of going back to cringy versus creepy.
Put that on a shirt.
Something has been taken from me. It's the first panel.
I love that. Sorry. So when you go into these, you're reading LitRPG, yes, and you've got the ones where the stats are explicit and the rules are explicit, where you're versus the ones where you are learning through interacting with your environments. So basically, one has you have what it means. What is you have the player's manual work versus you're going through the tutorial level, right? How do those interact? I guess is there there's room for crossover? I'm assuming, and what kind of experience would that give?
I don't know how much they can cross. I think that presence of the stats is a pretty strong dividing line between this. I mean, not to talk about my own stuff, but I can speak to the game lit side of. So I have a book called Spells, Swords, and Stealth, and it's based on basically a D&D world. There's some kind of interaction with ours, but only through dice and whatnot. But it basically follows some NPCs from a game. Like when the players walk away, that's when the story starts. And it's them going and adventuring and like doing classic D&D adventure stuff. But at no point do they never talk about hit points or skill points or anything like that. They grow stronger. They talk about like their process of learning and like training and getting stronger, but only ever in like the outside world, like our world, talking about the game as it exists, do people even discuss mechanics, and even then I don't really go into like the depth of it. So, but if I did have those levels in there and those stat changes and stuff that's just sort of implied by showing them train and montage, then that would be the real, like, that would be the slice. It would instantly flow. Again, to my understanding, it should bear mentioning that this is such a new genre, as Bree pointed out.
Right.
A lot of these definitions we're talking about are not only new, they are in debate. So, you know, this could be deeply inaccurate in a modern era.
And oftentimes applied retroactively, right? I mean, there are some examples that are given of both GameLit and LitRPG that were written and published before either term was coined.
Sure.
Yep, 100%.
A ton of it, honestly. There's a lot of it.
So did the term come from people started writing like this, and so we gave it a name, and then it started getting bigger, and it started.
I think authors probably did.
I believe it actually is in the wiki. I will wear my research on my sleeve. I'm not going to pretend I just know this. No, there is, I do not remember their name, but there's a Russian author who wrote a particularly notable piece of LitRPG, I think in 2014, 2015, and shortly after, in a conversation with some colleagues, it was 2 or 3 people that were mentioned, they chose the names. My understanding is that the coining of the term is quite deliberate and specific in origin, which is interesting. I mean, I don't think that's often the case.
Yeah, I agree. And authors a lot of times will be the ones defining this. Readers may not realize that, but sometimes we find a niche and we're like, you know what, we're going to market this very intentionally. Another one that happened with recently is paranormal women's fiction, very intentional author happening, made that genre, subgenre come to light. Also, I believe, and I'm probably going to absolutely butcher this, but I think LitRPG is trademarked, so I still win. I think it is utilized specifically, and I can't remember who. There's somebody that takes offense whenever that term is used, and I can't remember who it is. But yeah, so I think a lot of times you'll hear GameLit be a more generalized term, just because there's something that
GameLit is the open source.
I think so, yeah, I think so.
If
We're
I
all
may,
learning up here.
Yeah, right.
uh,
That's such a new genre.
and progressing and leveling up. Did I do it? Did I tie it in?
You didn't give a specific number of how much XP you got.
Well, I was about
Experience points.
As I was about to say, that is honestly the part of it that I find the most alienating, is the crunchy stating of the numbers.
I do too.
But again, generally when I find something in art or culture alienating, it weirdly pulls me closer to it, because my reaction is almost always, wow, I would never want this, but other people do, so what's happening there? What am I not seeing? What is a crucial difference? I mean, this is sort of why I asked earlier what people thought about sort of the ideal reader. Because in all honesty, when I think about the crunchy version, I think about when I was 10 and for school, I made a labyrinth, Minotaur and everything, with traps and everything, and then I made a story that went with it. And the story was essentially a LitRPG version of the labyrinth. And you could, if you wanted to, use the story as a walkthrough for the labyrinth.
You should write
Yeah,
that.
he's like, no,
Put
write
out.
that. It's not a bad idea.
My memory, let me be very clear that I'm
So
judging
many
only
fantasy
myself
things.
here. My memory is, even as a child, getting near the end of the writing process and thinking, oh no, I just wrote the most boring thing I've ever done.
So to throw back to the one we said in Dungeon Crawl with Carl, that's the problem with writing just mechanics.
Right.
And yes, that is definitely a problem. So with any hot genre, you're going to have a flood of folks who are not necessarily in it because they love the source material, but because they are trying to chase as many buys as they can in an optimal time and maximize efficiency, etc. And I wrote superheroes when we were the hot genre, and I got to be part of seeing that flood come in. And so I feel for the folks who are trying to do their best with this genre. But yeah, there's a very easy path to writing just mechanics, and I think probably the difference of the really quality ones are the ones Matt Evans is the ones that bring in classic themes, emotions, characterization, the stuff that adds meaning and texture to the structure.
I also would say too, it's the hard sci-fi folks, they're that could never really happen, the physics of that are wrong, right? Versus the hard D&D folks often will take sorry I'm generalizing, will often take a very mechanical approach to this genre, and like if you get that stat point wrong, I have seen readers crucify authors about stat points and things not like progressing the right way, and I'm like, man, I would never have got that, never. So there's always going to be that in any genre, though, you know, like there's going to be people that have a very specific preference, they want to see something very specific, so do what you do.
So we all remember Choose Your Own Adventure books, right?
Yeah,
How
Which I
much?
believe is also true.
It might actually.
probably.
How much of that do you think came from? How much of this came from that?
I don't know. I see a lot of crossover in that one. Those to me, I think, are just often more about agency.
Yes, this was something that was crucial to me when I started learning about this, because I also thought of Choose Your Own Adventure right away, but to me, like the thrill of an RPG, just the way that I tend to play them, is really rooted in the idea of agency. And so that's part of why it took me so long to sort of kind of start getting my head into LitRPG. I'm like, but you can't control anything. Isn't that the point? And then I have to remind myself not everyone thinks like me, which is a good thing to remind myself. But yes, I think the Choose Your Own Adventure to me feels like not a straight, like not a progression, but still a very interesting like counterpoint to keep in mind when thinking about this, because it really does start to subdivide what do people find interesting about an RPG. You know, I'm on a show with people where we play RPGs, and it took me 2 years of being on the show before I realized that every single one of us was thought the show was about something else. Every single one of us was like in it for something else, and then it took me another year to realize that that's good actually. That like it's good that, you know, for this person it really is about the stats and the numbers and like turning this fictional world into something crunchy and you know, describable. And for other people it's about the opposite of that. Period. It's the end of my sentence. The end of that sentence really snuck up on me.
I mean, in talking about like Choose Your Own Adventure, one cool thing with this genre is a lot of these authors are on Patreon and they post pre-chapters and things like that. And it's not choose your own adventure necessarily as a reader, but you are influencing what is being written sometimes in some of these authors, the way they market their books and stuff. So that's a cool component too when we're talking about this evolution of the genre.
I do have one example. I'm sorry to keep going back to the series. I swear to God, it's not intentional, but I just happened to have talked to him, so I know about his process. So the Dungeon Crawler Horror series has a part of the setting of this is it's like an interplanetary like reality show. I know, right? But so they have gift boxes as part of like the mechanics of the world. And he actually lets his Patreons pick that stuff, and then he has to figure out how to work it into the story. So that is one of the few examples I have of a genuine choose your own adventure aspect of, because his patrons don't just like influence, they like, sometimes they screw the character over.
Yeah.
Often they screw the character over.
Sometimes others too, they will, what's it called? I just lost the name of it, but they'll write you into a book. Like if you're as part of their Tuckerize, yeah, it's not just like it's a name, but I've lost it. Yeah, they'll Tuckerize you into a book as part of their levels.
There are certain games, video games in this case, that have Twitch integration, where viewers can, with the push of a button, change your stats. Disco Elysium, which is a very narrative-based game and a very like personal game, has an option where people can, you know, at the push of a button, vote to either raise or lower a stat. And I think that it sounds to me like there is potential in the LitRPG world to really maximize that. I mean, if it really is either crunchy or the other thing, about, I refuse. I'll say it again, I just need a little break. I was already losing this train of that sentence. I am imagining an author who posts, you know, a preview of a chapter and then says, you know, essentially a poll to determine maybe not the crucial decisions of the narrative, but things here and there. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for fourth wall malleability there.
We do
feels
that.
suitable.
We do that in our newsletters.
Okay.
I do a Halloween event of that every year. It's not based on LitRPG, it's just a fun like Halloween thing on my site where every day I write the chapter and then I leave like 3 story thread options and everyone votes and then I write the next chapter and so forth. And so yeah, that's absolutely doable. And I think honestly, you're right, LitRPG would be a strong blend for that. You
Yeah.
could do, your first chapter is pick fighter, wizard, mage, or and and then you just branch from there. That's a very like a good synergy.
So you'd have to be experienced to do that. What if you got into like a corner somewhere down the line? You'd have to really be able to think ahead as an author.
Or you could die. I mean, that's part of the yeah, they can just
Like
die.
the character dies, and now
You
you
get
roll.
picked
Well,
the right
right,
class for
I
this
mean-
situation and you die.
That is a really wonderful thing about the idea of game lit is that you die in games. That's just a part, to me, of whether it's tabletop, video game, what have you, that like there's a lose condition in a way that for a lot of traditional literature, of course, ostensibly there is, but with lots of books, you kind of get the vibe that the hero's going to eat it at the end. But games, to me, come with a much more palpable risk of failure. And I think dying is an option. Getting written into a corner is an option. I think incorporating failure, it could potentially be a strength of this genre. I love that.
But it's not necessarily permanent.
Yeah, sometimes you can go back to the, it depends on the rules in your world. You
Yeah.
can go back to
So there's a failure option, but it's not a catastrophic failure necessarily.
I like
that's
things
the
with
rules.
catastrophic.
You die in your
So
head.
this good person gonna die, and they just won't figure out how to get there, which chapter they fall into.
Well, in general, your main character should fail a few times.
Right.
There's a reason in any classic superhero cartoon they fight the bad guy 3 times. Lose less bad, win.
Yeah. Because you're learning each time, and then you have to show that you have a possibility of getting better.
It's not progression fantasy without progress.
Right, you have to have progress.
Which requires setbacks.
Yep.
Very true. So say there's been about 3 minutes left. So, final closing remarks. Does anyone have anything to say about LitRPG? Did we learn anything today? Are we better people? Are we moving forward in our knowledge?
I just think if anybody's interested in this genre, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of these are web novels that you can read for free. So, or there's a whole side of this that is web novels that you can read for free. There's plenty on Amazon and all other retailers as well. But yeah, so Royal Road is a big LitRPG web space that you can try this genre and see if it's for you.
I would just say, it's like any other genre. So in some hands, the tropes and settings are going to lead to really good, strong, fun stories. In other hands, the stories that come from it might not be for you. That's the thing is, when we talk about genres as a whole, it's important to remember they're just a marketing term. They're just an overall umbrella, and the quality that you find within them is going to be greatly variable of all things.
I mean, I think it's an interesting opportunity to examine what is lost when something else is gained. When you take things that are more endemic to traditional fiction and add another layer, does something else get lost? How do we feel about that? Is it alienating? Is it enthralling? To me it feels like both in a very exciting way.
All right, who are you and where can they find you while we're at the fun?
So Kara Straight, I am part of the film Reroll. Our whole cast is here. There's another one of them. We're at table something.
One.
We're at table 1. You'd think I would have been able to remember that. I'm also going to be on the pulp covers panel and the movies mayhem and other word that starts with M panel later this weekend. That's the one.
Who are you?
I'm Brie Lockhart. I write under a few pen names. I don't know where I'll be. I think I'm on some more panels. I'm on the romance sci-fi something after this at 4. So yeah, but I'll be around. Green hair, not hard to miss.
I am Drew Hayes. I don't know what table I'll be at yet. Find that out at some point soon. I will be on the Cursed Voices panel at 8 p.m. tonight with Scott. So come on out and swing by and say hi.
Oh, also, I also forgot we're doing a live reroll tomorrow. That's also important.
That's going to be fun.
I forgot about the things that aren't just me.
That's okay. I'm CD Walter. I'm currently, you will occasionally see me running right by the North Troublemakers booth in the dealership. My cousin works there. And I'll be at the romance and sci-fi panel next in 10 minutes.
Nice.
So,